In 1968, two little boys went missing in the city of Newcastle in northeast England. Eventually, their bodies were found, and the cause of their death would soon be revealed. However, this was not nearly as shocking as the identity of their killer. This is the unsettling story of Mary Bell. Make sure to watch till the end so you don't miss any of the chilling details. Scotswood is a working-class neighborhood located in the city of Newcastle, England. In the 1960s, the town was still recovering from the effects of the Second World War and was considered a rough and neglected neighborhood. Although the town itself was not in great condition, residents felt safe and comfortable among one another. Back then, people didn't really feel the need to lock their doors, and they weren't as fearful for their children's safety as parents are now. During this time, many children were left unsupervised for hours to play, finish schoolwork, and fend for themselves. Young children would also be allowed to roam the streets freely. However, the people living in Scotswood would soon learn that there was danger lurking in their neighborhood. Their safe and peaceful town was about to be shaken by something absolutely horrific. A killer was living among them, and they were taking the lives of young children. One of those children was 4-year-old Martin Brown. On Saturday, May 25th, 1968, Martin left his house to go play with some of the other kids who lived in the neighborhood. This was the norm for Martin, who would often play outside with his friends and come home in the late afternoon for his dinner. However, it started to get dark outside, and Martin had still not returned home. His parents weren't too concerned because all the local kids knew each other and the older ones looked after the younger ones. They figured that wherever Martin was, he was safe and sound and expected him to be back soon. Sadly, Martin's parents would soon learn that their sweet baby boy would not be returning home. Just one day after Martin's disappearance, two boys were playing in an abandoned house when they stumbled upon a body. The boys reported what they found to the local police, who later identified the body as that of 4-year-old Martin Brown. The police then had to deliver this terrible news to Martin's parents. They were absolutely devastated about what had happened to their son. They wondered how on earth something like this could have happened, and they wanted answers. However, the police were just as confused. When they discovered Martin's body, he had a bit of blood and saliva on his face, but besides that, there were no apparent signs of violence. Interestingly, there was an empty bottle of painkillers on the floor near his body. Without further clues, the police assumed Martin had swallowed the pills and accidentally overdosed. His death was ruled an accident, and the case was essentially considered closed. But something would happen in the coming days that would cause everyone to question Martin's cause of death. A few days after Martin's death, his family was preparing for his funeral. While getting ready, they heard a knock at the front door. When Martin's mother, June Richardson, opened the door, she saw an unexpected visitor standing there. It was an 11-year-old girl named Mary Bell, who also lived in the neighborhood. The news of Martin's death had already spread across the town, so Mary knew about it. Despite knowing the tragic news, Mary asked June if she could see Martin, which was pretty strange considering that she knew about his death. In her heartbroken state, June tried to explain to Mary that Martin was dead. But what Mary said next was so chilling that it would leave Martin's mother, June, feeling disturbed. Mary told June that she didn't come to play with Martin because she knew he had died. She said she wanted to see his body in the coffin. Martin's mother was so horrified that she slammed the door in Mary's face and told her to stay away. As unusual as Mary's request was, this was only one part of her strange behavior. June had no idea that Mary had already seen Martin's dead body prior to showing up at their house. June would soon learn about the true nature of the relationship between Mary and her son, and it would terrify her. It was eventually revealed that the day the two boys discovered Martin's body, two girls had also showed up at the abandoned house. One of those girls was Mary Bell, and the other was 13-year-old Norma Bell. Both girls had the same last name but were not related. They were just friends. Although it may seem like Mary and Norma randomly stumbled upon Martin's body, it was no coincidence. It turns out that the day before, Mary saw Martin playing when she lured him into the abandoned house by promising him candy. Once they got inside, Mary strangled Martin with her bare hands. She was 7 years older than him, so it was easy for her to overpower him. She left Martin's body there and returned to the crime scene the next day with her friend Norma. Mary brought Norma there to brag about what she had done to little Martin and show her the body. However, Norma soon became a full-fledged accomplice to Mary's crimes. Shortly after, the two girls broke into Martin's nursery school, vandalized it, and left some disturbing things behind. Mary left notes taking responsibility for Martin's death and promising to kill again. One of the notes Mary left was quite ominous. It read, "I murder so that I may come back." Despite the troubling contents of these notes, police officers assumed it was just a sick prank that was harmless. The nursery school had also been burglarized several times, and the police thought this was simply the latest incident in a string of break-ins. A few nights later, Norma and Mary were caught at the school. But when the authorities arrived, they said the girls were simply loitering, so they didn't get into any trouble. To make matters worse, Mary was going around school and telling her classmates that she had killed Martin Brown. It seemed that Mary was proud of what she had done and wanted people to know. However, she had developed a reputation as a show-off and a liar, which prevented anyone from taking her claims seriously. Sadly, Mary's seemingly crazy statements would become more believable when another little boy turned up dead. Almost 2 months had passed since Mary and Norma vandalized the nursery school. The first crime against Martin Brown had gone unpunished, so the girls started planning more violent acts. On July 31st, 1968, Norma and Mary were playing outside together. They noticed 3-year-old Brian Howe, who was out wandering the streets by himself. Mary and Norma decided to seize the opportunity, so they brought the toddler to a piece of wasteland that was full of weeds. They found a spot that was hidden behind concrete blocks, and that's when Mary strangled Brian to death. This time, Mary did something that she didn't do when she murdered Martin. She mutilated Brian's body with scissors, scratched his thighs, and butchered his genitals. When Brian didn't return home, his family became worried and sent his sister to go out and look for him. While she was searching for her brother, Norma and Mary offered to help. This was quite sinister considering what they had just done to precious little Brian. They searched the neighborhood, and Mary even pointed out the concrete blocks that hid his body. But Norma said he wouldn't be there, and Brian's sister moved on. It is clear that the two girls viewed this as some kind of game, and they got pleasure from toying with their victims' families. When Brian's body was finally found, it sent shockwaves through the entire neighborhood of Scottswood. 2 little boys were now dead, and the town was concerned about a potential serial killer living among them. The fact that there were no empty pill bottles near Brian's body and he had been mutilated had proven that his death was not an accident. This made police realize that Martin's death might not have been an accident after all, which would make sense after the notes they found of someone admitting that they had murdered him. Due to the nature of the cuts on Brian's body, police assumed the killer was a grown man with an affinity for sexual violence. However, they would soon find out that the real culprits were the complete opposite, and it would shock the whole town. When the coroner's report came back, another disturbing detail was found on Brian's body. Once his blood had cooled down, they noticed something carved into his torso. It was the letter M. Further analysis would even prove that a razor blade was actually used to carve the letter N at first, but they went back and added a line to turn it into the letter M. We're assuming that N stands for Norma and M would stand for Mary. This means that either one of the girls could have been responsible for the lacerations on Brian's body. The coroner's report also found something else interesting. The lack of force in the attack suggested that Brian's killer might have been a child. This would completely change the direction of the investigation, and the police began interrogating local kids to find out if they knew anything about these two murders. When the police interviewed the two girls, they both behaved strangely. Norma was excited and kept laughing, while Mary kept avoiding questions, especially when the police pointed out that an eyewitness had seen her with Brian Howe on the day of his death. Some of the children that were interviewed also told police that Mary bragged about killing Martin Brown. However, Mary's behavior would become even stranger. On the day of Brian's funeral, Mary was spotted lurking around his house. She even laughed and rubbed her hands together when she saw his coffin. All of this led investigators to visit Mary a second time for another interview. It looks like Mary realized that the police were closing in on her, so she made up a story about seeing an 8-year-old kid hit Brian on the day of his death. She said the boy that hit him was carrying a pair of broken scissors. But this is where Mary went wrong. The information about Brian's body being mutilated with scissors was never revealed to the public. The only people who knew were the police, and the only way she could have known was if she was involved in Brian's murder. Mary's knowledge about the scissors was enough to incriminate her, and the horrific truth would soon be revealed. It turns out that Mary was actually behaving strangely in the weeks leading up to the first murder of Martin Brown. On May 11, 1968, Mary was playing with a 3-year-old boy who had gotten badly injured after falling from the top of an air raid shelter. His parents thought it was just an accident, but it is believed that Mary had pushed him. The next day, 3 mothers came forward to tell police that Mary had attempted to choke their young daughters. Police interviewed Mary and gave her a lecture, but no charges were filed. However, this time was very different, and the police were determined to get a confession out of the 2 girls. Both Norma and Mary broke down under further questioning. Norma began cooperating with the police and told them that Mary had killed the 2 boys. Mary cried and said Norma was lying. She admitted to being present during Brian's murder, but tried to blame Norma for the actual crime. Both girls were charged and a trial date was set. In December of 1968, the jury agreed that Mary had committed the murders and handed down a guilty verdict. She was convicted of manslaughter instead of murder, as court psychiatrists had convinced the jury that she showed classic symptoms of psychopathy and could not be held fully responsible for her actions. Norma, on the other hand, was regarded as an unwilling accomplice who had fallen under a bad influence. Even her father said she was developmentally slow and simply followed Mary's lead. She was acquitted for these reasons. The judge concluded that Mary was a dangerous person and a serious threat to other children, so she was given an indefinite sentence. However, They let her out after 12 years because they were impressed with her treatment and rehabilitation. She was released on license, which meant that she was technically still serving her sentence, but was able to do so while living in the community under strict probation. Several people thought Mary was an evil girl and a bad seed who should not have been allowed to re-enter society. But was Mary born evil, or was she just a product of her upbringing? As soon as Mary came into the world, she was introduced to pain and trauma. She was born on May 26, 1957, to a 16-year-old named Betty McCricket. When the doctors showed Betty her new baby girl, she told them to take that thing away from her and that she didn't want it. Betty was a sex worker who was often away from home on business trips to Scotland. But Mary enjoyed her mother's absence because it would mean that she got a break from the constant mental and physical abuse she had to endure when her mother was home. In one instance, Mary had supposedly fallen from a window, and in another, she accidentally overdosed on pills. To those on the outside, it appeared that Mary was simply an accident-prone kid. However, it was later revealed that these were not accidents. An eyewitness saw Betty throw Mary out of a window. She suffered a traumatic brain injury but survived. This head injury might even be a possible explanation for her psychopathic tendencies. Her mother also fed her handfuls of sleeping pills in an attempt to kill her, but she survived the overdoses too. But this was only the beginning of Betty's cruelty. Mary claims that when she was just 4 years old, her mother started using her for sex work. She says her mother forced her to watch while she served her clients. Betty's specialty was BDSM, which involves choking. It is believed that Mary became fascinated with this behavior and associated it with power and control, which is why she strangled children.
Now, Betty, are you saying that your daughter is innocent?
No, I'm not saying she's innocent.
But something must have made her do these things.
Yes, something possibly must have made her do these things.
What was it about her life and her family you think that could have driven her to these things?
Maybe it's the arguments between my husband and myself might have had some inflict on her. I don't know.
Have you been very despairing sometimes?
Very despairing, under a lot of strain, stress, and grief for my daughter.
In addition to the neglect, abuse, and disturbing things Mary had to endure, she also watched her 5-year-old friend get run over and killed by a bus. Everywhere this little girl turned, tragedy and horror seemed to follow her. Although Mary's traumatic childhood may have played a role in who she is, it does not excuse her heinous crimes against Martin Brown and Brian Howe. But we'd love to know what you think. Should Mary have stayed locked away for her crimes, or do you agree with her being given a second chance considering her young age? Roughly 4 years after Mary was released, she had a child of her own and even got herself a brand new identity. She and her daughter are both anonymous and protected by a court order. Mary did all this in an attempt to live a normal life. However, the lives of the victims' family members have been the furthest thing from normal since those tragic events. According to Martin Brown's sister Sharon, her brother's murder was so devastating that it basically destroyed their childhood. Sharon said, "She definitely stole my childhood and my sister's. I was born into a very quiet, cold, sullen home, and I didn't really know why. I can't imagine what a happy childhood would have been like." Do you have a strange or disturbing incident that you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at veryweirdish@gmail.com and let us know what you think about the case of Mary Bell in the comments below. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you. We appreciate you sticking through that story because we know it was difficult to hear. If you're interested in more content like this, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. We cover all things weird, mysterious, dark, and disturbing every week. And remember, the world is a scary place where the monsters are walking among us. So stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next one.